Morocco is located in the northwestern corner of Africa. It is about the size of California and has an average monthly income of $400. It is still ruled by a king. We saw many people driving Mercedes in the cities and donkey carts in the country. It is a land of open areas and busy cities. Places like Casablanca, Fez, and Marrakesh thrive where water gives life. Morocco is a Muslim country and has about the same population as Texas. After traveling for 17 hours and overnighting in Casablanca, we drove about 2 hours to get to Rabat, the capital of Morocco. The Hassan Tower was supposed to be the largest mosque and minaret in the world, but when the king that designed it died, building stopped. In the old days, the waterman used to go to a fountain and then bring water for people to drink. These days, he's more of a novelty. We were not allowed in the royal palace, and you certainly were not allowed to take pictures of the police. This was my first sighting of a person in a jalaba, and I had different ideas about it at first. We then drove a short distance to Chella, which had ruins from the Phoenicians, the Romans, and later Arabs. The next day we started a 4-hour bus trip from Rabat to Fez. Our first stop was to see some cork trees in a cork grove. We stopped at a market in a small city on the way to Fez. Many of the exteriors of buildings belied the opulence inside. A riad was a family home that was converted to a hotel-type living space. We visited a local pottery shop where we saw people making pottery and tiles.
Oh yeah.
Hey, bravo!
Well,
We then entered the souk, which is a market for all kinds of items. The Fez Tannery has goat, sheep, cow hides soaking for 2 to 3 days in cow urine, pigeon feces, salt, quicklime, and water, which prepares the hide to absorb the dyes. It is then soaked in dyes and dried in the sun before ready to be made into leather goods. On the night of the wedding, the bride and the groom would each be carried into the room by 4 men on these sedan chairs. Coffins are only used to transport the body to the cemetery.
I can do that. I got it. I like that scarf. Think we'll ever be able to do that? I can remember that. That other one I think was better. Velvet, yeah. Oh, that's neat.
She has to change once an hour. So this is a new one. We don't wear dresses not only because we're bride, on the weddings, but also because we get invited to someone else's wedding. We need to attend if it's a traditional party,
Oh, so she wears them again?
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Of course.
My mom gets a new dress. I guess at least once a year she needs to get a new dress because we get invited to someone else's wedding or a traditional party.
Right.
So yeah, it's a shame to wear the same dress
Yes.
every single time.
So you walk into a store and buy that? Or you have somebody-
No, you go to a specific tailor and you get him. You tell him design you want. So can you please make me this
Oh.
dress?
Wow.
Dress, and he gets your size. And
Do you bring like pictures from magazines or how do you?
of course, magazines. So this is another picture, another dress,
Oh.
another color, but the same belt.
Same. You look the same.
Really?
Same
No,
husband, yes.
this is a new picture. It was in 2013, so 5 years ago.
Okay.
Or
Wow.
6 years ago. They were attending a cousin's wedding.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your dad is handsome.
Beautiful.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you wear these dresses too? You wear these kind of dresses?
Yeah, I do. And as I said, عاشقين
And she turns red.
Tell us.
The next day, we took about a 2-hour bus ride to the ancient Roman city of Volubilis. The ancient Roman city of Volubilis was around roughly about 500 years, and as a Roman city, hit its peak with about 20,000 people living there. Many of the stones in Volubilis were taken to be used later in Meknes, a place we're visiting next. Instead of using fired colored tiles as they do today to make mosaics, the Romans used naturally occurring colors in stone. The next day, we took a 10-hour bus trip over the Middle Atlas Mountains to the desert town of Erfoud. Ifrem was about an hour out of Fez and is their little Bavaria. We got off the bus to watch the monkeys and stretch our legs, and we saw this woman running down the road after her donkey. It turns out this Berber woman in her 40s and her 2-3-year-old son were going to get water for the day, which she does every day. Her family are sheep herders.
Dancing off the dunes so far away, night music so sweet, so long.
In years past, there was a large ocean covering much of what is now the Sahara. When it evaporated, the fossils were left in the bedrock. Only about 20% of the Sahara is actually sand. We use these four-wheel drives to go the rest of the way into the desert to our camp. Some driver, not in our group, got off-road and stuck. And guess who bailed him out?
Oh my God! Oh geez!
What is this life that pulls me far away? What is that home where we cannot reside? What is that quest that pulls me onward? My heart is full when you are by my side.
Later that afternoon, we went to visit a local farm family which was extremely dependent on irrigation. The farmer had climbed the tree and wrapped a leaf around it from the male of the date palm to pollinate the tree.
That's okay.
There we go. Look at that, isn't that pretty?
We then stopped at a village where we listened to some traditional music. It is not permitted to walk into the cemetery, and the way the rocks are placed at the grave shows you whether a man or a woman is buried there. We then visited a family of nomads who settled down. Between tourists and buying 4 camels, it is enough to allow this family to exist. We met the husband, wife, daughter, and granddaughter, and it was funny. The daughter was ready to leave this area and move to a town.
Roughly 700 US.
The designs had to dry and eventually washed off, and the whole design didn't last more than a week on Jody. Tomorrow we're heading for Ouarzazate. See you then.